Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, take out your notes. We're going to be continuing looking at the United States Constitution and other things associated with the Constitution relative to your civil rights. We're in the heart of this unit, which has got all kinds of really important things, really interesting, really controversial things. In fact, I was going through some of the stuff, and I'm like, oh, that case makes me really sad. Actually, when we get to that case, you're going to be like, wow, that's really sad. It's a First Amendment case. It's a free speech case. It's a case having to do with texting. Okay, thank you. And so there's all kinds of very interesting things going on. Thank you very much. We're going to be handing back the quiz here in just a sec from the last one. And we've got, when is your next quiz? Next Tuesday, exactly. Next Tuesday. Yep. Yeah, quiz every week for 4 weeks. And then after that? Actually, let me see. The last unit's going to be on politics, and there'll be maybe a couple of quizzes on that. But the textbook reading's not that hard or challenging, really. Oh, no, it'll be longer than that. I'm hoping to get it in as quickly as possible, but the tricky thing is that there's lots of interesting dynamics associated with so many of these things. Like for today, we're getting into guns. Yeah. That's just one of the things. We're not talking about workout, pew, pew. We're talking about, some of you guys are like, I got my guns. Yeah. Talking about Second Amendment stuff. Yeah, there you go. You show off your guns in advanced fitness. Where did that ever come from? Who came up with that? I don't remember that when I was growing up. Guns. Anyway, and voting rights, and then we'll get into First Amendment. There's all kinds of good stuff. All right, I'm going to hand this back. You keep the score sheet, and I'll get the top part back. Exactly. Okay. Yes, read that very carefully. No red ink in the future. Grazie. Okay. Just kidding. No, actually, what's that? You were surprised. Yeah, no. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't scare you anyway, because it's so yeah. Okay. Yes.
On this one, ranking my only dirt.
So it was either 5, 5, 4, 6, or 6, 4. In other words, close. I never said that. No, I never said that. No. Sometimes it is. Most of the time, it's actually right dead even, but not always. Such a disappointment. Just kidding. Just kidding. No, don't do better. You can't do better. Just kidding. Okay. Yeah, if you get them all right, you get a little dramatic performance like this. Oh my gosh, will you finally get around and study? Just kidding. Yeah. Daphne, I'm so disappointed. Not. Okay. Actually, there was a lot of... Just kidding. Yep. Pew, pew. Okay. So keep it up. So Chris is going to be back. There we go. And missed it by that much. Yeah, it's like a lot of you guys did really well on this one. It was just a little bit close. Okay. I'll take the top part. Grazie. Thank you very much. Thank you. Did I trick you on one? Which one? Some of them are kind of tricky. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of fixing something. And if you get stuck on like, what am I talking about? I mean, you can ask me. Okay. Oh. Did you finish? Okay. Q. Did I get you your? I don't think I got yours yet. Okay. This one. Okay. Sorry. There we go. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Here we go. You ready? Kilo. Let's get right to it. The Kilo case. Okay? Kilo. Kilo is not a case about metric system measurements and things like that. Kilo, I have no idea who Kilo was. Kilo was somebody who was the plaintiff, maybe, or maybe the defendant. It's really hard to tell because by the time they get like flip-flop, you start out with plaintiff versus defendant, but then depending on who wins at various different levels, sometimes it switches over. By the time you get to the Supreme Court, it's appellant versus respondent, as in the respondent is the one who won on the lower case. So it keeps flipping back and forth and so forth. Kilo versus, I think Kilo was I'm guessing Kilo was probably one of the homeowners that didn't want to sell their house to New London, the city of New London. I believe that was in Connecticut, didn't I say? Okay, Connecticut. And Lizzie, do you remember, what was Connecticut like all interested in doing relative to like their economic prosperity? They wanted to encourage business development, tourist development in their community. And what was one of the real good locations in New London that would be like really good for attracting tourists and so forth? Yeah, the beachfront, yeah. And who lived in the beachfront? Yeah, people did. Because they lived there for a long time, right? Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. One of the things I'm going to have you write down, because this happens every year, right? I mean, this is an easy one. We actually rushed through it toward the end, so I want to make sure that you have that accurately, and it's in the video, so make sure you watch the video. Make sure you have it accurately in there. Students, by and large. In fact, it's pretty rare. I don't think anybody here was in favor of the city of New London in that case. That you felt like they should be able to, get the maximum property tax value for the benefit of the community's businesses, which helps, incidentally, police, fire, and the schools, so forth, by increasing the tax value, the property value of a building on a location. What's going to produce more revenue for a community? Your old house on the beachfront or a new hotel? But you guys, none of you favored the hotel, did you? No! Oh, you weren't even here for it. All right, in fact, with all of these ones, let's see if you can, we'll take a volunteer, make an argument as to why they should, this is the city of New London, because they did, why they should win. Give it a shot, Owen. No, you don't want to? Want to give it a shot? Here's the background. Okay, so this is Fifth Amendment, eminent domain. So flip over into page 2 of your handout. So we're doing kind of a assortment of rights before we get into some like major themes, like voting rights and First Amendment rights and so forth. So this is the just compensation one. The government can take your property if two things. Okay. In other words, you have a right under the Fifth Amendment eminent domain issue to have the government not take your property unless two things. Kurt, what are the two things? What does the government have to do in order to take your property? Public use. Okay, that's the first one. Very important. What was the second one? They've got to give you a good compensation thing. And sometimes, honestly, this is what the government does is, in order for them to avoid a lawsuit, if they're going to widen the road in front of your house, they'll offer you a certain amount of money. And they'll look at the fair market value of your property. They'll maybe offer you a little bit more. Because if they don't offer you enough, in your view, there's going to be some money tied up in lawsuits. Right? But sometimes they come a little bit higher, just to kind of clear it up, clear the path. Was that an issue? Was the money an issue in this particular case, the New London case? No. What was the issue? Yep. They were kind of stretching the definition of public use. They were saying it is for the public benefit that the city condemns, takes over this land, gives you some money, even though you don't want to sell, and it's for the public benefit because then the property value goes up. Even though those particular people who will own the land after it's resold are going to be private developers. It's very different from having the land taken and be part of a public road or part of a public park or part of a public school. Frankly, around here, the planners, you know what they try to do with respect to parks and schools, even as they're having all these different housing developments and so forth go in there? No, here's what they try to do. They try to plan ahead. They try to locate and go, okay, looks like there's a bunch of houses starting to go up in this part of town. We better buy some land now and set it aside for the future development of a school. Because it's no fun to in fact, I can't even think of a time around in this area where, a school district that says, we're going to condemn this land for public use for a school. No, what they do is they try to buy it up because it's usually, if you can get it cheaper, that's better. So, does that make sense? So, give it a shot. Give it a shot, Ivan. Why is it good for the community to let private developers own the land instead of some old, granny and grandpa?
From what I heard, the owners of those schools, right?
Yeah.
And if they're going to your state, they're paying your state taxes. So there's more person on the area that paying for the tax. You have your city now has more money to develop stuff like public property.
Yeah. And it's always an interesting thing. How many of you guys would generally say this? Because this is kind of like a life choice for as you're looking for many, many, many years. How many of you guys would like to live in a quiet community that doesn't have a lot of traffic, that doesn't have a lot of people living in it? So I think we're asking this as a really interesting. How many of you guys are like, I want more stuff in my community. I want more opportunities. I want a major league baseball team and football team and all those kinds of things that big cities have. Yeah. And yeah. So here's the dynamic, of course. Here's the dynamic. The more people you have, the more it's going to generate revenue as far as tax dollars. But guess what? Those tax dollars are all going to be eaten up for increased schools, increased police, increased fire protection, increased roads, increase all those kinds of things. So, kind of comes around and so forth, right? What happens when you move to a quiet area of town? Maybe around here, within 10 years, it's all built up around, and your little quiet commute. I mean, I remember when I first started commuting to teach at North Star, it didn't take me near as long as it does now. I mean, that's just saying. The traffic has increased. So here's what you need to know, right? The city of New London won the case, right? I think you guys got all that in your notes. Okay? So another way of saying that is, Victoria, would you say that the Supreme Court interpreted, or Isabel, sorry. Victoria's over there. I know, it's like, whew. Yeah. Ivan, I'm talking to you. Isabel. Did the Supreme Court say that the Fifth Amendment right on the eminent domain was a real property rights thing? That there's a lot of property rights there? Did the property owners win their case? No, they didn't. Basically, that's why this is why this cartoon came out after the case. Here's a local government, City of New London, literally taking a wrecking ball or a wrecking gavel to an old house, private property, and destroying it after giving the people money because they were forced to sell. Yeah, and it's like,
Does that mean they selling it to them for the price that they're getting the money for? Or are they selling it twice?
it's good value, but they don't want to move. I mean, they're giving them a lot of money. It's kind of like, how many of you guys are aware of the property value of the home that you live in right now compared to, say, 5 or 10 years ago? Has it gone up or has it gone down? It's gone up. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. Of course, if you're like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money by selling my home. And moving where? Oh, to another house that's really expensive in this area. I mean, if you move to like a really, really remote area where the property values are still pretty low, good for you. But anyway, so who knows where these people moved? They weren't too happy about it. No. Was this a popular decision? No. This is not a decision that gives a lot of property rights to homeowners. It basically says, look, if a local government decides that you shouldn't have the property, it should be in the hands of somebody who's going to make a little bit more value to the community, that's how they ruled. How many of you guys are like, yeah, that was a great decision by the United States Supreme Court. I'm really happy with it. How many guys are like, something needs to be done? Property rights, man. This is easy, all right? This is a perfect example of a case. You ready? Write this down. This is important you know this. Because as we go through civil rights, you need to know constitutional rights are very, very valuable. If your rights are held in the Constitution, that's huge. Hang on. I'm getting like a whiff of something. It'll pass, yeah. Okay. It's not like in, when middle schoolers are coming in like, I'm going to take care of not having not taken a shower for the last 5 weeks. Axe, I'm like, anyway, sort of bad memories maybe for some of you guys. Like, oh, that was last week. Anyway, so, don't know, it's okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's probably, so it's just here. All right, sorry. All right, so here's the deal. So if you've got a constitutional right, this is easy. Can states reduce that? No. Can the Congress and the President reduce your constitutional right? No. You understand that? So when we get to, say, for example, the abortion cases and so forth, the Supreme Court has said that is in the Constitution, that is your right. Can states reduce it? No. Can the federal government, President, Congress, reduce it? No. What about the other question? If the Supreme Court, like in this case, doesn't really give that much in the way of rights to property owners, can the federal government and or state governments expand those rights? Yes, write that down. Okay? I'm going to finish this thing because this was, when this case came out, people were furious around the country. They're like, how are you kidding me? What's going to protect us from our local governments trying to do what they did in the city of London? I'll tell you what, here's what happened. State laws, state constitutional changes, and I want to say even the federal government got involved in it, but I don't know that they necessarily had to as much, because pretty much all throughout the country, state constitutions and state laws were drafted, amended, changed to give people rights, property rights, so that that situation wasn't going to happen to them. Translation, if you live in Idaho, that ain't going to happen to you. Because if you've got a property right and you don't want to sell it to the government so that they can resell it to a private developer, the government can't do that. Do you understand that? Your rights have been expanded. Are they constitutional rights? No. But they're civil rights under state law. As long as the state backs them up, they're your rights. Do you understand that? It's a very important thing as we go through. I'll give you a couple more examples, because this is going to apply when we get the Second Amendment right to bear arms. The government can expand on the rights that you have in the Constitution, but the government can't take those constitutional rights away from you. So, for example, when we get to the Second Amendment, some governments in some states give more rights for gun ownership. Got that? As far as voting rights, it hasn't really come up yet, but when do you guys have a constitutional right to vote? At what age? 18. Could a state give you the right to vote at 16 or 17? They could. Whoa, that's a pretty strong opinion. They haven't. Okay? There are places around the world and so forth that sometimes, and some cities are considering this. They're like, oh, if we want to get you in the practice, so, we'll let you vote in like city elections or local elections at age 16 or 17 and so forth. There actually is a trend on that. But they can give you more rights than exist in the Constitution. They just can't take those away. Is that understood? Okay, good.
So if the state government expands on your constitutional rights, are they still constitutional or is it?
They are civil rights. They're just plain civil rights. When we get to voting rights and so forth, because we're going to see, like, you've got a right not to have your vote taken away on the basis of race, 15th Amendment. You got your vote right as far as, like, the gender, the 19th Amendment. You got your right to vote at age 18, 26th Amendment. You got the right not to have to pay a poll tax, 24th Amendment. And then we're going to have this one in here. You don't have to do a literacy test. Where's that in the Constitution? It's not. It's federal law. Okay? It's federal law. That is a civil right. So my point to you is, early on in this civil right part here, some of your civil rights are as a result of Constitution. Some of them are as a result of laws. If you look on the top of page 3, when we finally get to that, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there's a lot of really interesting things there. Some of it applies to education, right? You guys have a right to have the best education, like, opportunities, and if you have a disability or there's some kind of an impairment and so forth, the schools are required under law, what law? ADA, yeah, federal law, to make sure that students have the best opportunities and so forth. And so there'll be all kinds of meetings for students with parents and teachers to make sure that that's going to be taken care of. It's not constitutional law, but it's federal, so you got to do it. Does that make sense? Okay, pretty clear on that one? All right, good. All right, now let's get to the next example. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Okay, here's what you need to know about the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Through most of this country's history, as I mentioned before when we introduced this briefly, the Supreme Court really didn't look at it as though it had anything to do with an individual right to have weapons. Do you understand that? That's not how they interpreted it. People who like the Second Amendment, how many of you guys would say, Second Amendment, that's a good amendment. I like the Second Amendment, okay? All right? This is Idaho. How many of you guys are like, Second Amendment, guns and so forth, there's a little bit too much of that. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more regulation in order to discourage gun violence and so forth from taking place. Okay? All right? Actually, you know, it's interesting because if we're like, you know, go to another community in this country, are there communities that have more support for what I would call, what is called, gun control? Okay? Yes. Okay? And typically in those communities, you're going to find that the restrictions on gun ownership and things like that and so forth are greater. Is Idaho a gun control state? No. So where do people who want to possess and use guns, where do they get their rights in Idaho? State law. Okay? State law. It's not the Second Amendment. It's state law for the most part. Yeah. Okay? So, yeah. So anyway, but in the context of this, you guys, we have a little bit of opportunity to discuss that and so forth. But in the context of this, just know this. For those people who are in favor of gun rights and gun ownership rights and so forth, the Supreme Court has not been your friend through most of this country's history. Do you understand that? They've interpreted it as more of having to do with National Guard and militia. Yeah. Because there's references to to militia and so forth in there. As in, like, you know, this goes back to the time of, you know, we're going to try and prevent the British from coming to Concord to take away our guns. What? When did the British ever, like, try and take away guns from people living in Concord, Massachusetts? Don't you know the date? 1775, April 19th. Did they get stopped? We covered this last year. Hello? Yeah, they did. By who? Bunch of Americans from Massachusetts standing behind fence posts and trees and shooting redcoats as they were marching toward Concord in order to take away the guns and so forth. Okay? So that's how the Supreme Court interpreted it. Until the Heller case. Here we go. Let's get to the details of the Heller case. Okay? 2008. And it's very interesting because there's a lot of attention on, is the Supreme Court going to take up any more cases? Because there is some interesting opportunities for the Supreme Court to do this. The Supreme Court took up a case by a Mr. Heller who lived in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. law passed by officials elected by Washington, D.C. voters who were looking at a city that had a lot of crime and guns and illegal gun use and guns used for violent crimes and so forth. And it's an interesting thing because some people are like, that's an even bigger argument for the personal possession of guns as a means of personal security. And of course, other folks are going, well, the more guns there are, the more guns are going to be. Anyway, you guys get a sense. How many of you guys have ever had a really interesting discussion over guns and gun rights with other people? There you go. I mean, so you probably are familiar with at least some of the things going on there. And of course, the difficulty is bad people use guns for bad purposes. And sometimes the bad people who use the guns for bad purposes and so forth, they may actually even be in following the laws that exist already in that community. And sometimes the laws that exist already in that community are deemed to be fairly strict, in which case gun rights advocates say, look, you got your gun control laws in there and it didn't stop this terrible thing from taking place. And the gun control advocates are going, well, we need to fix those laws so that this isn't going to happen. And you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? Here's the reality. If you want to get a bigger federal gun control law in, where does it have to pass? The House by a majority vote. The Senate by what? Not a 2/3. Oh my gosh. It would normally be a simple majority, but since that is a issue, what could gum up the works as the issue is being debated in the Senate? Thank you very much. A filibuster. And and this is the tricky one, how many votes does it take in the Senate to end a filibuster? Therefore, you get a chance to actually vote on the bill. 60. Okay? So it's not, it basically ends up being like 3/5. So 60 out of 100. There's a huge debate on that going on right now. Okay? If it passes the House and if it passes the Senate, it goes to the President. Do you think a bill requiring more gun control, federal gun control, is likely to pass the House under the current House? Yes, it's pretty close, though, because the Republicans and Democrats are pretty close in there. Would it pass the Senate? If it passed the Senate, would Biden sign it? I think so. Yeah, probably. So this is the question as far as, like, what's going to happen in the Senate? What would they have to do in order to get 60 votes? This is where people, I mean, I look at this every day and I'm like, are they going to change the filibuster rule? How many votes does it take to change a rule? A simple majority. If all the Democrats wanted to get rid of the filibuster and Vice President Harris broke the tie, the filibuster would be gone. Gun control legislation and other things that are on the priority agenda list for Biden and Democrats and so forth, they would have a much easier time coming through. But there's a handful of Democrats that are like, I don't know if we should do that, because what comes around goes around, or whatever, however that expression goes. When the Republicans, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because if we got like back and forth and back and forth, when the Republicans come back into control in the Senate, do you think they're going to restore the filibuster to help minority Democrats? I don't think so. Okay? I don't think so. So here's the deal. In Washington, D.C., back to the Heller case. In Washington, D.C., they wanted gun control. And they had some of the strictest gun control laws in the country. Okay? They were so strict that they basically banned private ownership of guns in the D.C. area. Do you understand that? A complete ban. So you couldn't just sort of say, hey, I'm safe, I'm careful, I keep it in my house, I keep it under lock, I only use it for personal defense, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, those laws, just to give you a comparison, those laws are about as strict as ones you would see in places like Australia and Britain. And of course, here's the deal. In Britain, do they have a long-term history of, like, letting the people have guns? No. Once upon a time, kings and nobles did not want the little people to go out there and shoot in their forests and shoot the deer and shoot the things and so forth, nor did they want them to rise up in rebellion and so forth. So historically, in Britain, gun use was limited. There was not an expectation of people having guns. What about in the colonies? Did you need guns if you were going to be a pioneer, frontier family? Why? Who's killing who?
You got the bears, you got the apes.
You've got wild animals, you've got game that you're trying to hunt, and you've got local inhabitants that don't really like the fact that all these Americans are coming into their neighborhood and so forth. And so, yeah, guns are going to be very much part of the American frontier. And so once that's been in our country's history for a long, long, long time, you don't just all of a sudden go snap. I mean, some people can snap and half the people are gone in the entire universe, but you don't just go snap and all the guns are gone. Right? And complicating the issue is, do all the people who actually possess guns today possess them lawfully under the laws of their community? Now, and that's the danger. Because if you had a requirement for people to, if, for example, turn in guns under the laws or whatever, change laws and so forth there, who would do that? What about the law-abiding citizens? So actually, it's because some of the law-abiding citizens are going to, I'm law-abiding, but that's not one of them I'm going to abide by. And of course, if you're a criminal, you're going to turn in your gun. Well, here's the deal. Let's find out what the Heller case was. So this was an absolute restriction on guns. Do you understand that? Heller made the argument to the Supreme Court and said, oh my gosh, please help me out here. Throw me a bone. Second Amendment. Don't I have some U.S. constitutional right? Because I can't, he said, I can't rely on local government to allow me to possess a weapon for, hunting purposes. I think his main argument was for personal home security. And the Supreme Court was like, yeah, it doesn't look like you're getting much, you're not getting your way with the Washington, D.C. government. Let me see, you're law-abiding, you're using it for your home security, just within your home. It's just a regular, simple handgun. It's not like do-do-do-do-do-do-do. It's not like an automatic weapon or anything like that. Like, are those issues relevant? Yes. Okay, so it's a simple gun, and the Supreme Court said, anyway, I don't want to get into all the various different kind of components and so forth, but it's really tough when you get into a discussion with somebody about the various different qualities of guns. It's like a shoulder-held bazooka. That's a personal firearm, Yeah, there we go. I've got a Stinger missile in the back. Don't mess with me. And a cat. I don't know, which is more, providing more security. Heller won. Write that down. Heller won. It's the first time. And it's fairly limited. It's a fairly small right to bear arms. It's held by an adult who is lawful, who doesn't have a criminal record, because that's one of the things that could limit a person's right to have. Because there's all kinds of laws out there that are like, if you commit a felony and so forth, you can't legally own weapons. Okay, do you understand that? And it's for like someone's home. Okay, so this is not like he can walk out of his house and walk down the street, right to carry sort of thing. You understand that? Okay. Questions about Heller's decision. Now, that leaves everything else up to politics. And when it's up to politics, that means the voters get to chime in on a regular basis. And it really does make a difference. You can write this down. Some communities, as I pointed out, typically I would say they're going to be cities and some of the West Coast and northeast areas of the country are going to have greater gun control. Now, the federal government also has gun control as well, and some of which passed after Ronald Reagan was shot by some idiot who was trying to impress Jodie Foster, who was an actress. I know, but she was young then. Anyway, makes no difference. He was trying to impress her, so he figured, I'm going to shoot the president. Okay? By the way, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was kept in confinement because he was a danger to himself or others. And by the way, he was not allowed to send letters or Google or text Jodie Foster.
So how is that not worse than being found guilty?
Well, here's the deal. He was confined because he was in danger. So how long is he going to be confined? As long as the officials deem that he is a danger to himself or others. And I want to say this has happened. He finally, this was like, he tried to kill Reagan in 1981, I think it was. But within the last couple of years, they're like, I think he's safe now. So he's free. John Hinckley was the guy's name. Anyway, after though, one of the bullets went into the head of James Brady, who was the press secretary for Ronald Reagan. And Congress then picked up the mantle, and they passed what is known as the Brady Bill. Okay, Republicans and Democrats, enough of them supported it, President signed it, and it provided some gun control in the sense of, you can write this down, background checks, okay? I want to see like a waiting period, a little bit of a waiting period, okay? So they've got that set up now, okay? But there's all kinds of various different things. Some gun commerce takes place, at gun shows and so forth, maybe not as closely regulated. Then there's the concern of like the size of the magazine and the range, silencers, the automatic components and so forth, all these different variables. And the debate goes back and forth. And I guarantee, every time you have somebody use a gun in a crime that kills multiple people, the debate will come back. Okay? And it has. And especially if you have somebody use a gun going into like a school or a setting with small children. Or like in Vegas, I guess, there was a guy up in the hotel that was shooting down on an outdoor crowd that was attending a music concert. Okay? Yeah. So, what's that? Actually, it's interesting because I think Idaho is like, are they gun control? No. Idaho's gun rights. So is it easier in Idaho or California to get a permit to carry a weapon? Idaho. Is it easier in Idaho or California to be able to possess or use a weapon if you're like 15 or 16 years old? It's easier in Idaho to do that. Yeah. Is it which state is considering, and I think they may have even passed that, I don't know if the governor signed it, allowing teachers to have the opportunity to carry a weapon in school? Idaho. That will be an interesting discussion that the principals and so forth. I don't need no gun. My guns. Just kidding, not my guns. I got a baseball bat signed by Robert Redford. Yes. Victoria, yes.
Outnumbered, right? Someone comes
Shh.
in.
Shh. Okay, go ahead. Shh. Shh.
I want to talk about that with the teacher, and she mentioned how even though I'm pretty sure she just told you the gun rights, that she did not want that to pass because in her community, teachers already do so much that means that they would also have to learn like gun safety and how to clean all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's already quite a bit of a challenge. Shh. Yeah. So when I first started out in teaching, that was pre-Columbine. That was one of the first big school shootings that took place in Colorado. There's been a lot more that's been done as far as implementing and devising various different security measures for schools and so forth. So, it's gotten complicated. The college level. This is, for those of you guys who care about this stuff, in fact, raise your hand, curious. Raise your hand if you're like, if I attend college, I want to be able to attend college where I have the right to carry a weapon on campus. Okay? Hands down. Know this, on many college campuses, you do not have that right to carry a weapon on campus. And so that's a very controversial thing. Sometimes people are like, well, you have more people carrying guns and it's going to be more likely and somebody's going to get mad at somebody and they'll be dead. Other people argue, and you've probably heard those of you in favor of gun rights would be like, well, if you get some idiot on campus, like happened some years ago at Virginia Tech, I want to say it's about 10 years ago, some guy went on there, he was shooting a bunch of people, and I think he ended up killing over 20 people, and it was a no guns campus. All right, so they had to rely on local security, law enforcement, to get there to try and end it, as opposed to if, I don't know, some of you guys who raised your hand and so forth, you'd be like, I'll take care of this. Pew.
The church in Texas when the guy went.
Oh, yes.
And two of the guys in the congregation.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Because of course, that's private. Churches are private and so forth. And I suppose a private university would be able to set their own standards and so forth there. Interesting issue, yes.
So, by carrying a weapon on campus, do you need a firearm or just a weapon?
Firearm. Yeah. Firearm. I don't. Yeah. Yeah, and there's all kinds of, our knives Are knives relevant to Second Amendment? No. Of course, here's the deal. Does the Second Amendment provide that much in the way of rights having to do with firearms? No. What really provides rights, if there are going to be, are state and local laws. And so that's why it's an open political issue. There is a lot of discussion. It's very relevant at all times. What does it take to change a law in a particular community to make it more gun control or less gun control? Change that law. Yeah, the voters elect various different people in there, and they change it up. It doesn't take 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate and 3/4 of all the states as far as ratification. That's constitutional amendment stuff. This other stuff is up to the voters, and so it kind of comes and goes and so forth. And it's interesting because if you're very much a gun rights person and so forth, and you live in a gun control area and you're not happy about that, that's what happens a lot in this country. We start to see sort of like a separation of various different things. Anyway, interesting debate, an interesting issue. Anybody have any final question or comment about that? The takeaway is, yes?
So, is it, for as long as, all the empty is in, is it no voting period or?
You will need to know the specifics of every single one. Some of them are determined by the state law. Some of them could be influenced by whatever the policies are of that particular campus. I'd say all private campuses are going to set theirs. It varies.
Aren't, like stores and stuff not allowed to play you can't sort of carry?
It depends on the local laws of that community. Some laws of some communities may be very, very strict, in which case those are implemented in private businesses and so forth in that community. Some communities may leave it up to the local businesses as to whether or not they're going to. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. So here's the takeaway. It really varies quite a bit as far as guns go. Okay, I think this issue is going to be with you guys for quite some time. And the real interesting question to me right now is, as long as there's a filibuster in the Senate, there's not going to be a big change in gun control laws. If they get rid of the filibuster, hold the door, because there'll be all kinds of various different things that are going to be coming out of Congress. Because it could flip back and forth and back and forth. I'm already predicting the next round of congressional elections. The Republicans are actually predicted to take control of the House. It's very close. The Republican, it's very close as far as the Senate. I mean, it's 50-50 right now. The Republicans may take control of the Senate. The Democrats have the White House for 4 years. Okay? But some of these other ones kind of shift and move and so forth, so it's really, really interesting on that. One of the Democrats has pretty much said, I like filibusters, and by the way, he is not a gun control fan. He's from West Virginia. His name is Joe Manchin. He is a Democrat, but his state is very Republican. He's like one of the last kind of like Democrats from what would otherwise be a Republican state. And he's like, I'm not going to go along with a change like that. So he wields a lot of influence on those issues. Okay? Interesting topic, though. Okay? Raise your hand just as a final measure, just a kind of thing. How many of you guys think that this country would be better off and the community would be better off with stricter law enforcement laws having to do with guns? Okay? How many of you guys think the country is doing fine with the way they are right now? How many of you guys would like there to be more gun rights with respect to people? Okay? How many of you guys are like, I'm going to watch and see how this thing works out? I mean, it's a hard one to play out because because if somebody's like, you got a whole bunch of people like the Wild West, and you're like, I'm going to solve this problem right now. Pew! Oh, that was not really what I wanted to do. Oops, I got the wrong person. I was on neighborhood security. They gave me a whistle and a gun. Anyway, So, final comments? All right, let's go to the next one. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Third Amendment because the Third Amendment is not the most controversial thing. Ready? Were you really? Really? Why? How did that come up? Was the government? Was the military? We're like, hey, we need an extra bed.
And then I'm saying, thank goodness no one's trying to increase our Third Amendment, right?
Yeah. Which is what?
That voters can't force themselves to do that.
Yeah. Do you guys like that? Does the United States military really need the ability to go into people's houses to bunk up? Okay, sorry. Owen, go ahead. Did matter. Yeah.
So that's equivalent to saying not letting the police involved.
And I would say, and put this down, this is really reflective of what was going on in the American Revolution, right? So when you hear, some of you guys recall from last year, it's like the British sent in, 2,000 or 10,000 soldiers in New York or Boston or Philadelphia. Like, oh, where did they all camp? They moved into people's houses. You didn't have a right to tell them to take a hike. And that can be a real problem. How many of you guys would like a foreign army to come into your house? How many of you guys would like, would your parents would be, like all cool with that, right? Now, of course, the irony is the Third Amendment doesn't do anything to protect us against if there's an invading force and that invading force is like taking over all of our towns and cities and states. Because they're going to look at the Third Amendment and go, I blow my nose at the Third Amendment and the entire Constitution. Psh. Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's like, it's not an issue. I mean, this guy's joking. I think he's dressed up like a Hessian, to be honest. I mean, it's like a joke thing, right? Here's the deal with respect to the Third Amendment. During times of peace, during times of peace, you have a right to basically tell the military that they're not going to come into your house. Now, the military actually has a sufficient budget to get base housing for all the various different people and so forth. And if they're like being stationed in Germany or Iraq or whatever and so forth, it's not impacting you. Okay? This is what comes to my mind as far as like who would be people that actually would really enjoy this right? And they don't have much rights at all. No. People living in Xinjiang province in China. Right here in the northwest part of China, where there is a minority population called the Uyghur, who are Muslim, who have been trying over several years to actually advocate for their religious rights and so forth, and have been in quite a bit of a tussle with the Chinese Communist government, and the Chinese Communist government has got the upper hand. Have you noticed? Yeah. I think the Chinese Communist government would be fine with all of those people moving out. But we're talking about millions of people. So here's what's been happening, right? Shh. Shh. Let me finish, okay? Because it actually does it ties with this. There's been a lot of Chinese troops that have been coming in to pacify the situation because some of the Uyghur were fighting back. And the Chinese Communist government's like, oh, what are we going to do to prevent there from being lawlessness in this community? We're going to bring in lots of law enforcement and the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military. So what they've been doing is identifying various different people, and there's been the camps, right? For re-education camps. And a lot of men have gone, a lot of women and so forth, but here's the deal. While they built these camps, and I mean, all you need to do is look at the satellites and it's like, whoa, man, they're really doing a lot of construction. And you've got millions of people basically in slave labor, I don't know, growing cotton, but where did you get your cotton? Where are your cotton goods from? Anyway, not going to get into that whole issue and so forth. But meanwhile, where does the People's Liberation Army stay? Here's what's been happening. You're not going to like this. So let's say that there is a man from a household who's been sent off for re-education. They want to keep an eye on the wife and the kids. No, not marry, but the soldier stays in the house, okay, and sometimes even stays in the bed where the husband was, because they need to have a roof over those guys' heads, plus it also allows for them to monitor the situation much more closely. Do you understand? So you're like, ooh, we've just added a whole nother level of Can they make a Third Amendment type complaint against the Chinese Communist government? It's not going to be happening. Okay? They've actually learned to keep their mouths shut because otherwise it makes it even more difficult for them or the people who are married to them or in their families who are in confinement. Okay? Yeah. It's like, who's watching this? So if somebody's watching this for the Chinese Communist government, anyway. Okay? It's ridiculous. Any other questions about the Third Amendment? No, we're not going to waste a lot of time on the Third Amendment because it's not really that relevant. There's all kinds of more interesting controversial stuff like the Ninth Amendment. Let's get to the Ninth. We're going to talk about the Ninth Amendment in the context of some particular rights, but first of all, let's remind ourselves what is in the Ninth Amendment. It's sort of this throwaway amendment, remember? Where, well, if we didn't really write down what our rights are and so forth, we still have them. Really? Good luck with that. But no, we have them. The Supreme Court has interpreted it this way, the Ninth Amendment. They'll say, yeah, you really did have it at the time that the Ninth Amendment was adopted, if you can prove that was what was really going on back then. I mean, it was just like, it was so given that we're like, are you kidding? Do we ever even write that down? Here are the ones that have actually been given credence by the Supreme Court, even though it wasn't written down specifically, have been given credence as though, okay, the Ninth Amendment kind of covers this. One of them, I mean, here, actually, they've got a couple of good ones here. The right to choose your job. Really? This is the United States of America. Does the government tell you that you have to do a particular job? No. Hopefully not. Here's the thing. I mean, those are going to be different as far as prisoner rights and so forth. Hold on. Yeah. Actually, if you're in prison, you do want to have an opportunity to do various different jobs within the prison because it gives you like good time, it gives you opportunities for a little bit more freedom within the confines. Yeah, so I mean, you're actually looking for those, okay? It's not talking about going out and breaking rocks, okay? So, being able to choose your job, because were people able to do that back in the late 1700s? Sure, okay? And I don't know that that's really been challenged so much as far as like the government's going to tell you what to do and so forth and so on. I don't think that's really come up. The right to move freely. I wrote that down in your handout. Okay? This one actually is very important. The right to move freely from one place to another. This is going to come up more in the context of like criminal law enforcement. So for example, if they're kind of like, here's an example. The government is like, oh my gosh, there's too many people driving drunk late at night after a big, New Year's Eve or St. Patrick's Day and so forth. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a traffic stops throughout the entire area, and we're going to stop everybody and check them to see if they've got, alcohol in the breath and so forth. So who does that apply to? Everyone. Is that a probable cause thing? Oh, I've got probable cause to believe that you're driving under the influence of alcohol? No, it's like they're stopping everyone. Well, what is that infringing upon? That's infringing upon my right to move freely. Oh yeah, where's that? I've always had that. And so do my parents and my grandparents, going all the way back. So it's not going to be really easy for the government to do that.
Did you argue that under the Homestead Act as well?
Under the Homestead Act?
Yeah, but that's the right to move freely.
I'm not sure if I follow exactly where you're going.
And then they would move, they would own the land, and then they would own the land. They would work the land.
Well, I think you would need to look at the particulars of how the Homestead Act works. As far as like, I can move to the land, the government said I can have the land after a period of time if I'm actually working the land. That right to own the land, that's going to be particular to the statute, the homestead. This is just talking about moving. I'm going over here, I'm going over there. I mean, some countries don't have that. We've been fairly free to do that. So, Ninth Amendment. Here's some other ones that are kind of interesting. Right to get married. Now, that is interesting. Were people able to get married to each other way back when? Yes. What kind of people? How far, historically, does the Ninth Amendment work with respect to the right to marriage? What kinds of folks were able to get married back in the late 1700s? Men and women. Now, men, women, adult, that were not married to other people. Okay? There were racial restrictions as well. We're going to be dealing with those in this unit. Okay? And as far as, we're going to cover that case as well. But as far as like, it's a general right. The rights that people have today with respect to marriage are going to be much more specific, and the Supreme Court is going to find other areas, mostly the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, but we'll get to those ones later on. So that it is a very limited. So just think historical. If people could do it back in the late 1700s, you can do it. Otherwise, the Ninth Amendment is not the most powerful amendment. What's that? Oh, no, people loved each other. But there also was all kinds of other restrictions that people have on marriage that limited the ability of some people to get married to other people and so forth. Okay? So anyway, that's the Ninth Amendment. Not too much more to say on that one. There's the right to travel freely. Woo, travel for free. Anyway, I think that's an ad to go to, where is that? Ooh. No, I think that's in Mexico. Yeah, I think that's like the Pyramid del Sol. Like in Teotihuacan. In fact, I think that's one of the ones I went up to, unless it's one of the other ones in Mexico, where they take you up to the top and then rip out your beating heart and offer it to, Quetzalcoatl or whatever the Aztec god is, and then kick you down the steps. Boom, 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 boom. Anyway, that's a sad thought. Let's get to voting rights. Here we go. Let's chunk up on the voting rights issues. People have the right to vote. And it is a very controversial issue. We'll come back to this again when we get into the politics, the last unit. And, oh my gosh, people are kicking around all kinds of stuff. And the last election, oh my gosh, there was a lot of talk about, especially during the COVID and the quarantine and so forth, and how to do voting and how to get it right and all kinds of stuff. And every state is doing it just a little bit different. What are the basics when it comes to voting rights? Well, the Constitution has some things to say about it, okay? It was mostly generic. In fact, there really wasn't much said about it until the 15th Amendment. Okay? The 15th Amendment basically looked at the situation of African Americans who had just been freed under what amendment? 13th, very good. They've been freed after the Civil War, 13th Amendment, they have their freedom. Now they're in the Deep South and wondering, are they actually going to be able to vote? 15th Amendment guarantees the right to vote regardless of race. You got that? So have African Americans continually, since the time of the 15th Amendment, been able to vote without difficulty? No, make sure you write this down. The 15th Amendment did not provide that wonderful protection for voting rights for African Americans in the Deep South, beginning in the mid-1870s. And it went on for about, 90 years. Do you understand that? Because as white majorities in the Deep South were restored to voting rights and voting privileges and voting opportunities, they restored themselves to power, political power, economic power, social power, and they were in charge. If you're African American still living in the Deep South, as opposed to having moved up to the north, Chicago, Detroit, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, what have you, your rights were very precarious. Got that? So what's it going to take? It's going to take the civil rights movement. It's going to take a lot of people making a lot of effort. There will be some constitutional amendments, and there's going to be some critical laws passed by Congress. We'll come back to those here in just a bit. All right? 19th Amendment. Woohoo! 19th Amendment. Women have the right to vote. And so do men, because the actual words, as I've gone over that with you guys, the actual words say your vote right is not taken away on the basis of your sex. Okay? Yeah. So the reality is,
There are technically all women in there. So
if they wanted to and said men are stupid, they could get rid of the 19th Amendment and bar men from voting. So the reality is, historical reality is, the 19th Amendment, you can write this down, the 19th Amendment made sure as a constitutional right that if you were a woman and you lived in a state and your state hadn't got with it yet, because some states had already given voting rights to women. What was the first state that gave voting rights to women? Wyoming. Idaho, I want to say, was the fourth. They were all western states, and I've gone over this before. Why in western states did women have the right to vote compared to, the East Coast being the first one to allow women to vote? Go for it. Yeah, go for it. Because of what? That's part of it, not quite. Valued in what? If you're in a pioneer family and so forth, could you literally, is a woman going to be, in a sense, quote unquote, put up on a pedestal and said, oh, we're going to kind of keep you separate from everything else that's going on and so forth? No, that was kind of like an Eastern attitude, right? Women didn't work there were some women that worked in factories, that's for sure. But if a woman was in a household, she'd be married, the husband would be in charge, she'd be in charge of the kids and so forth, and the husband would make all of those very difficult political decisions on behalf of the household. But in pioneer families like in Wyoming and Idaho and so forth, it's kind of like we need everybody all hands on deck. So there was a real